How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Horsetooth Cinema. Apologize for the voice if it's off at all. I'm recovering from a little bit of a cold. It's also why I haven't uploaded in like a week or so. But while I was sick, I sort of came up with this idea of doing a video about controversial movies. Movies that are controversial, naturally tend to split audiences, and so there's a lot that I love, there's a lot that I hate, and there's a lot that I'm just kind of meh on, and I can see the arguments on both sides. So I kind of wanted to do a video like this in 3 parts, and so in this first part I'm going to be talking about movies that are controversial, but I really like them. And then in parts 2 and 3, I'll be doing ones that I hate, and then ones that I'm kind of, kind of mixed on. And so when I'm talking about controversial movies, I'm not necessarily saying these are the most controversial movies ever made, because they're certainly not. I'm not going to be talking about like 120 Days of Sodom or anything like that, because I haven't seen that. I'm not very interested in watching movies just for the sake of controversy. These are more movies that generally just kind of split audiences a little bit more, maybe split audiences and critics. And I noticed making this list, at least for the ones that I really like, that I think all 4 of these movies generally have positive reviews on, say, Rotten Tomatoes, for example, but there are a lot of people that really hate all 4 of these movies. So yeah, I'm just going to talk about them now. So the first one is a movie that I would love to make just a super long video about sometime, and I have plans to, but haven't gotten around to it yet, and that is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. This, of course, is the sequel to the classic 1981 Raiders of the Lost Ark, and most people, audiences and critics alike, generally tend to like this movie. But that doesn't mean that it's not the most hated of the original trilogy, which it definitely is, and that doesn't mean that it didn't spark a lot of controversy when it came out, which it also certainly did. Now, there's a couple reasons for the controversy, I think. One of them is the portrayal of Willie Scott, which is the woman sidekick in this movie. All the Indiana Jones movies kind of have that archetype. And much more so than I would say Marion or Elsa, Willie Scott is very much kind of the damsel in distress archetype that we see in like Republic serial, classic like 30s adventure serials that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas kind of based Indiana Jones off of. Yeah, and Willie is kind of like a useless character. I mean, she's not exactly someone that's interesting to watch. But my kind of defense of that character, again, it goes back to, what Steven Spielberg and George Lucas cited as their inspiration for Indiana Jones. It's sort of poking fun at those old, Republic serials. In the really good making of documentary about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, George Lucas in particular talks about how like those serials always, they have these ridiculous archetypes about like the damsel in distress and a bunch of other things, but they also take themselves really seriously. And so they just kind of wanted to make a movie where they would, have a character like this, but have it be a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, clearly making fun of it. So I think if you're looking at it as like a serious portrayal of a female character, it's not great. But I kind of think that that's not really their intention of it, and I really like the direction that they took on this movie. Temple of Doom, more than the other Indiana Jones films, seems like an attempt to poke fun at those like old Republic serials that they were very, inspired by. Because of course in Raiders, I mean, Marion is such an amazing character, like such a great sidekick. She's very independent, she can kick ass herself. But that's not really what those old serials were doing. They were sort of modernizing it. And that's great, but I really do like the approach of sort of doing it from a more like comedic perspective and kind of making fun of it. The other big controversy of the film is the accusations of racism against Indian people, particularly in the dinner scene where the 3 main characters are at this Pankot Palace, and there's this massive like exposition scene going on, but at the same time, Willie and Short Round are being served like really disgusting things like monkey brains and bugs and snakes and things like that. And, the accusations were, well, this film thinks that, that's what Indian people eat, and it's just very culturally offensive. I think if you're looking at it that way, I would encourage you to watch the making of documentary. And again, just kind of think about it from the perspective of these were people who Steven Spielberg and George Lucas are, in love with these old, adventure serials from the 30s and 40s where the times were different and the, cultural understandings were a lot worse than they are today. And again, those ones were racist in a way that took it a lot more seriously. But this one is again sort of poking fun at that. Steven Spielberg has also said, I think that it's kind of an inside joke with Indian people in general, because the kind of, it's more of a joke on Americans in that like, oh, Americans probably think that that's what Indian people eat. And so he kind of intended it as something that Indian people would kind of laugh at in a way of like making fun of Americans. And the scene also makes sense in the context of the movie because, this palace is, it turns out to be like this death cult, and, it's kind of a red flag of like, why are they eating this really awful food? So yeah, I think you just kind of have to look at the intent of it. I would really encourage anyone who might have problems with Temple of Doom to watch the making of documentary. It's on YouTube, I believe. So yeah, I love Temple of Doom for a lot of reasons. I think more than even necessarily the other Indiana Jones movies, it's the most like cinematic opera type thing where you have this amazing John Williams music that just kind of directs you through these action sequences and adventure sequences. And I love John Williams' score of that movie. It's probably my favorite that he's ever done. I love how dark it is. I really love how it embraces the sort of death cult vibe in the second half of the movie, even though it's this like, you know, fun family entertainment movie. Yeah, Temple of Doom is amazing. I think it's my favorite Indiana Jones movie, and I know that's controversial, but I'll have a whole video about this sometime. But yeah, that's a lot of the reasons why I think it's pretty great despite the controversy. The next movie I want to talk about is something I've seen very recently, and it's a director that I've wanted to check out, Gaspar Noé, who's a French, if you don't know, he's like a French like kind of psychedelic filmmaker. The movie is called Climax, and it came out in 2018.
Trying to talk about worst, fucking crappy art film. You got to watch Climax from 2018. It's also A24 is the worst fucking thing I've ever seen. I hated it.
In terms of the controversy of this movie, people generally don't like it because it doesn't really play out like a normal movie. It's a very simple premise. It's just that there's this dance troupe that is sort of practicing for, I believe, their tour or something, and they're partying one night and somebody laces their sangria with LSD. And the movie sort of transforms into this like really dark and scary like LSD bad trip. And some people might just not like it because the imagery is really disturbing, and you know, if that's not for you, I understand that. I personally, you know, like I like movies with really disturbing imagery. And some people might not like it because the characters kind of suck. And yeah, they definitely do. But I also, like, just from what I know about Gaspar Noé, like that doesn't seem to be his focus. Like, he's definitely not that concerned with creating like super interesting characters. He's more focused on just these like trippy sort of experiences, ones that sort of challenge your, you know, just your conceptions of the world in general, make you feel very uncomfortable. And as an experience like that, I think Climax is basically perfect. And it's kind of funny that this is as controversial as it is because, like, honestly, from everything I've heard about his other movies, which I've only seen this one, Climax is definitely, or at least up there with the least controversial ones. So yeah, no, I definitely want to try and check out his other filmography, but I really like Climax despite the problems that people might have with it. So yeah, really good film. And the last one I'm going to be talking about is by another spicy director, Quentin Tarantino, and probably his most controversial movie, The Hateful Eight. I like Tarantino quite a bit. I'm not like a massive Tarantino just fanboy who thinks he's like the greatest director ever, but no, I kind of don't think he's made any like really bad movies or anything. And I think some of his movies are kind of underrated, and this is probably what I think is his most underrated movie. I think if you look at Tarantino's career, there's kind of like the early 90s crime films, and then after that, he sort of started getting into, with the exception of Death Proof, he started getting into a bit more like revenge movie kind of trends. And, you know, I really enjoy a lot of those movies, and like Inglourious Basterds is great, but I think there is something kind of predictable about them, and I definitely think they're not as deep as some of his earlier movies, for sure. And I really like how The Hateful Eight is just sort of a response to Reservoir Dogs in a lot of ways, because it really is the same kind of plot where you have, you know, like a whodunit sort of scenario trying to figure out a crime event, and it's very isolated. It takes place entirely in this just one location. But really, I think one of the weaknesses of Reservoir Dogs is that the characters themselves just aren't that fleshed out or interesting, with the exception of Mr. Orange. Whereas in The Hateful Eight, I really do think there are a lot of characters that really, really can be explored in a much more like sophisticated way than in Reservoir Dogs. And I think it's kind of his way of saying, you know, I've evolved as a filmmaker and I can go back and do something extremely similar to my first feature and, you know, improve on it in a lot of ways. And I really kind of think that's what The Hateful Eight is, and I kind of don't understand a lot of the hate it gets. I mean, I understand where it comes from. It's a really long movie, and I can understand if pacing can be an issue for you sometimes, then, you know, I get it. I actually think it's a pretty well-paced movie. I think it really keeps you interested in the mystery throughout. And there is also the you know, claims of violence against women with Daisy Domergue, who's the one woman in the movie who's plays like kind of the outlaw that the bounty hunters are trying to, you know, cash in on. And especially like the, you know, how she ends up dying at the end of the movie is, you know, it's quite extreme, but like, it's a Tarantino movie, what were you expecting? And I kind of think that there's nothing that happens to her character that is, you know, a specific, like, on violence against women that couldn't have happened to just anyone in her position. She doesn't get raped or anything. It's just she gets, you know, brutally murdered. But anyone playing that outlaw character, you know, that could have happened too. So yeah, I think The Hateful Eight is you know, I understand where the controversy comes from, and some people really don't like this movie, but yeah, no, I kind of think it's one of Tarantino's best. So yeah, really good movie. Anyway, those are some of the controversial movies I wanted to talk about, and for the ones that I actually really like. I know that in some ways these movies are kind of spicy, but like, I really don't see these movies as that like controversial in some ways. Like, I mean, there's definitely a lot more like things like I Spit on Your Grave or whatever that are just like some of the craziest, like, why the fuck would you make that movie films ever, that I'm just not as interested in. I mean, they don't sound like great movies apart from the controversy. I'm just not that interested in the controversy. But yeah, just let me know down below what you think about all these, and of course, like, go, you know, inform your own opinion on it, watch the movies if you haven't seen them. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, you can like the video down below and subscribe to the channel. I've got more content coming out soon, do the part 2 and 3 on this, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.